We're continuing on with the assembly of the Seagull's Model Special Edition 87-inch Corsair. Available from Gator-Rc. As always, link down in the description below. Let's get into it. All right, we're going to get started on our fuselage by putting on the cowl ring. So they want you to use these 4mm by 20 screws with small washers. I'm opting for the bigger washers out of the kit because I think that they just are going to fit over that and support this much better. I'm sure this cowl is going to get banged around, obviously, and I'd prefer as much support in there as possible. So we're going to put those in. And for now, we're going to mount this up. This is not going to be a permanent install, and the reason for that is because I'm going to take this thing apart and I am going to coat all that wood with thinned epoxy to seal it, because right now it's not sealed, and over time it'll just wick in oil and junk and everything else. So we're going to tighten it up for now as we work, but that will be it, just temporary. So for me, I am going to use the Sato FG-90r3 3-cylinder radial. I've only ever had one other Sato, and that was the twin cylinder, and I didn't have a lot of great success with it. It had massive oil leaks up in the rocker heads where they meet the cylinder, and they would come about after, I don't know, first full gallon of fuel, and I could never control them after that. So got away from them and got into using Fialas. So I'm going to give it another shot on this plane, and because they made the cowl oversized to accommodate this thing. And I love the way radials sound. So we have another radial, which is the UMS 180 in our T-28 Trojan. That's a top RC model plane. But anyway, I love the way that they sound and look. So they give you a nice template with it. With our crosshairs, they show you what needs to be cut out in order for the carb to fit in there in the linkage, so that's also awesome. We have crosshairs here, and then they'll show you exactly where those bolt patterns go. So we're going to cut the paper a little bit just to make sure that we can make the crosshairs match, and then what we're going to do is we're going to mark out that whole thing, and we're going to get to cutting and drilling so we can get this thing mounted. So let's go. All right, I've cut my template just a little bit so I could still see all of the markings. We're going to raise this up so I can work on it. We're just going to loosen this handle. We're going to slide this thing all the way up in the air so I don't have to work on the floor. So how cool is that? All right, now from here, I can just use their square and line up all my marks. There, that all looks good. So check this out. These are cool things that you don't see while you're doing the unboxing, but there's a hatch panel down below that'll give you access to whatever it is you want to put in here. There's this other hatch panel here, which is nice because I could take that out to get to these lower engine mount bolts. So on the, what would be the top side, always use fender washers and lock nuts so this stuff don't pull through. So I'm using the biggest ones possible. On the bottom, I had to carve out in here just a little bit, and I'm using smaller washers, but they're still pretty thick and stout, and so is this firewall, so those could sit recessed in there like that. Then we're going to have our standoff so this thing doesn't pull out, but let's get these mounted. All right, engine's there, bolted up. We used washers to help support on that brace. We used lock nuts, through bolts. So always with engines, avoid standoffs that this bolt threads into that halfway and then that one threads into this one halfway. Those will always rip out of the aluminum. Always, always, always. So make sure your bolts go all the way through. Again, big fender washers, extra washers here for support. And again, we'll make sure all this is sealed. We also have baffles that will go in here in the cowl. But you gotta love radials. We'll be doing a fuel pump into this thing as well. All right, so let's talk about this. And I'm gonna put this in the front of the engine install portion, but I've learned it after I've already got the engine rough fit. Check this out. So we have in our Sato, that's our 3-cylinder 90, all right? We have the cowl roughly on here where it should be, where this spacer ring is like right at the beginning of where this taper kind of starts in here, which would put our bolt hole right about here, which is where we want them, right? All the way around. If you look at the spacing of where your prop is going to sit right here, we're out about the width of this prop hub. Okay, so I don't like that. Plus, you're having to push this thing back, and it's wedging itself down on the cylinder heads, which I can tell you through heat and vibration will just rub right through the cowl. So this isn't going to work. And the reason all this is becoming a thing, in my kit, I only got this set of standoffs, but it's very clear in the manual, they're different lengths. Let me show you. So here's the Sato 90R3. Look at the length of those standoffs. Now this is for your typical 2-stroke application. Look at the length of those standoffs. They're completely different. And also when you reference pictures, like you can see that's a long standoff picture. Definitely a long standoff picture. And as we come back into our radial, those are definitely considerably shorter. And when you look at the reference of those little holes and the side of the carburetor plate and stuff in there, we stick out a good bit further here than what those pictures are. And one of the crappy things is they don't give you a cowl to hub distance, and some of you will be like, oh, I'm okay with the prop sticking out a little bit, it's not worth the extra work. Here comes the problem, is the more we hang this weight out to the front, the more it's going to throw your CG off, where you may need more weight in the rear of this thing to counteract that than you normally would. So what I've done is I have these on hand, and these are also the one that comes with them. And when you look at that, those are 36 mil. And if I put those two together, what I shorten this thing down is about the distance of that prop hub. So I'm going to take off the longer ones. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to suck this engine back. Now, the other thing that I do when I rough fit is I usually leave off, I got the exhaust ring for this thing, so that way this comes out the bottom. I've actually debated just taking the tubes, these things that come with the Sato, and actually routing them so they come out there. My problem is I don't know if that's going to burn the side of the plane or not. I don't want to find out by School of Hard Knocks. I'm going to venture to say they would burn the side of the plane because it's covering enough fiberglass. So with that being said, we're not going to do it. We're just going to go with the, I don't know how you say that, Colio ring or whatever it is. Kelly-O ring, whatever. But that's going to stick here out of the bottom. So anyway, let's get this ripped off. Let's get that put back in. And you could see where our Venturi stack is there. We're going to have to grind away more of that area on the inside into that front servo area in order to get that to clean. But again, not a big deal. So let's get to it. All right, we might as well throw the exhaust ring on now. I'm pretty confident with the way things are going to work. Do yourself a favor, bolts, anything you don't want to come loose on a fresh install, just use red high temp silicone. It is the absolute best thing to prevent leaks and stuff from coming loose. So all of these fittings for the engine, we're going to apply some to the threads. We're going to install that, and then we're going to apply some on these threads that will thread into there, and that will keep all that junk from coming loose. So new installs before there's exhaust oil and everything all through these is when this works best, and it has days to fully set up and cure, and this stuff is going to wind up being some pretty rock solid stuff to prevent leaks and stuff from coming loose. So It's always worked well for me, especially those pesky exhaust bolts. Now, sometimes things just work out for you and we just roll with the punches. So I love this. We have our Kelio exhaust ring, or Kelio exhaust ring, again, however it's said, bolted up. And I didn't cut it. And normally, like, I'll mount the engine, cut the cowl, then put the exhaust on, like all of those things, like in that order. But this one, we can do a little different. I just mounted everything up, and we already know that this cowl mounting ring is much larger than the rest of the plane. So we already know where the cowl is going to sit. All we have to do is take this thing and we're going to trim this up to, you can either make it match the pattern of the ring or just stick out just a hair more as far as length, and that'll get you out past your cowl. So that way you have a really nice clean install. I'm going to make mine pretty flush with this and then just trim the cowl to match it. It's really not going to wind up burning the fiberglass or anything else. So this is going to be a really easy exhaust install. So I've marked it. Let's get this thing cut. All right, here we go. Let's talk about some stuff. Final answer on the standoffs. I'm perfectly happy with the way things sit now. 27 mil is what you want, okay? So there's that. The ring has been removed because now it's time to seal that up, and the bolts for it, make sure we're going to Loctite those in. And again, I'm using bigger than normal washers to really help support that in case you bang the cowl around on a rough landing or something else. Just give it a little bit more support. We're going to seal this up with slow cure epoxy. So here's a tip for you guys. I mix up the slow cure epoxy and old paint caps. I save the paint caps, and you make sure that's mixed. And then just a couple drops, not much of the alcohol in there. And basically you just want that stuff to kind of look like paint, because we really had to carve this out in here, and I want to make sure all that wood is sealed up because the carburetor is also right there. Okay, so the Venturi sits there, so I know I'm going to get fuel splashing around in there. We're going to seal all this up right now while the engine is off so we don't get any junk in there. So I'm pretty happy with this. Another thing worth noting, I had to grind down one of the standoffs in order to get the fuel fitting on the carburetor to pass by it. So you may have to do the same thing. But otherwise, let's get to sealing the ring and this, bolt everything back down. As far as the secondary ignition box, we're going to mount it to this plate. I've built myself a foam pad for this thing. You can 3D print them, whatever. For here, I just opted for some foam for vibration protection. This thing I usually like to mount on this side of the firewall. I didn't this time just because of the lack of real space to make anything in there. So I opted to come in here. I think it's going to be okay. This will help to keep it away from the servo, but really what you guys have to worry about is regular wiring against secondary high voltage wiring. This is where the problems come in, is this stuff being routed right up against this stuff. That's what we want to avoid. So a little bit of foam protection, a little bit of spacing away from that servo. I made a hole right in there so we can slide that through. And again, everything is roughed for now. We're still waiting on pins for our servo leads to make more wires, so we're just rough fitting everything. We'll clean it all up later and make all of our linkages. So that'll be pretty good. We got to make sure everything will fit and is the right length. Wiring, you have an RPM signal output. That thing needs to go to some type of device to break down that signal and send it to your receiver. So the best thing, RC Light Systems, they sell a converter for that. Works really, really well. This one will be the signal input from the crank sensor, and that's the one you don't want these two routed next to each other. That'd be a no-no. And this is going to go through opto isolation, so that's dual opto isolation. Gator-Rc has a great device, and I'll show you that later. And it's selectable with dip switches, so that way you can figure out what voltage you want to run for a particular ignition system for a plane, and you're not putting in all these little jumpers. All right, so I like that. But anyway, let's get this cleaned and tidied up and see that, make sure everything's the right length. All right, let's talk about fuel tanks. So they give us a 16-ounce fuel tank. I'm not going to use that. We have room in there. I want to use a little more fuel. 4-strokes are very fuel efficient, and I like long flight times. I also like to be able to fly and not have big varying fuel amounts go out. So bigger tank, it's going to keep that a little bit more stable. We're not going to use as much fuel. We have more on board if we want to. 24-ounce will fit in there. So one of the first things I do with these tanks is take them apart, look at the O-ring on the inside. Sometimes they don't put them in right, and they go ahead and they pinch that O-ring and it leaks. So a couple things I'll show you to fix that. We're going to take off this tubing, and I'm going to opt to use Viton tubing, so that way this stuff stays flexible a lot longer. We'll use that. And then the other thing that we're going to use is I'm going to pull this off, because on a tail dragger this doesn't work out well. On a tail dragger the tanks sit like this, so you're going to have to pick that thing up in order to get the fuel sucked out of it. I like to let them sit there on the ground like this, and then just go ahead and have the other clunk in the back. They don't get twisted or tangled. There's no issues with it. And I let that thing suck the fuel out back there. So we're going to pull this off, put in a longer one to go back there, and swap this one out. Let's do it. Here's a tip for you guys. Whenever you go to cut fuel tubing, do not use diagonal cutters to cut fuel tubing. You do not want that pinch effect. Use yourself a nice sharp X-Acto knife, so that way it doesn't pinch the tubing that it cuts through it. All right, up in the top I like to use a clamp. You can use a zip tie if you really wanted to, but that works best up in the inside of there. And now I use a ceramic clunk down on this end, and we push that thing up onto there a good bit. I like to use these on both the pickup to the carb and the one to suck out, because you're double filtering all your fuel. It's just good cheap insurance, and I use one of those down inside my fuel can, so that way I like never have dirty fuel issues. On these, we double wrap with stainless wire. This thing we picked up from Harbor Freight. Makes really nice, tight fuel ties. You don't want to go too much and cut through, but you want to see a nice pinch in there, and that's why I do that bevel, so it's there. I let the couple wraps stay. Cut that off and fold that over. And then we want to check, when you put this in the inside, you want to check your length. And there you can see that we're too long with this. You see how it rubs the back? So we're just going to go ahead. I'm just going to pull the clamp off the front one. That one's easiest. And then we'll cut that down and shorten it, because we don't want that thing dragging along the back. So if you go upside down, you don't want it stuck like that. That would be no good. In case you're wondering, this is what I use. T302, 304 stainless steel wire. Amazon, man. Whole roll of it. That size right there. Can you see that? All right, tank is done. Pickups are in there. The return is in there. Again, ceramic on both ends, the Viton, so that way it doesn't get hard over time. Now we're going to take a piece of heat shrink. To always take a look down through there, make sure the O-ring isn't pinched weird sitting on the inside, but this is just an extra little bit of security so the thing don't come loose or leak. So we're going to take this, make sure this thing gets hot, and we're going to start to shrink it down, get it close. And if you never need to get back in there, that is very easy just to cut off and open it back up. All right, everybody, there you have it. That wraps up that portion of the assembly of the 87-inch Seagulls Model Corsair, available over at Gator-Rc, link down in the description below. Do me a favor, head on over there if you're interested in this model or aviation models, RC models altogether. Check them out at www.gator-rc.com. Kind of your one-stop hobby shop, wide variety of models. So we have everything from covered to uncovered, composite to fiberglass to wood, you name it. Top RC model, Maxford USA, Sebart, and as well, obviously, Seagulls models. So I'm Brendan. This is Just Plain Crazy. You're just plain crazy for always hanging out and watching. We appreciate every one of you. Smash that thumbs up button. It helps us out a lot. If you're going to hit this, make sure you give me 2 of those for sure. Shameless plug to like, share, subscribe, all that cool stuff. And don't forget to check us out over on the official Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok Just Plain Crazy pages. So with that being said, until the next episode, I wish you guys happy flights, peace,